Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salailo Makwidere, on Salam Media. If you're just tuning in, we are still here for the second hour of the show to guide you through another hour of compelling current affairs. In this hour, we continue our deep dive into the key issues and events shaping our world. In a bit, we'll be speaking to campaign coordinator of East African Crude Oil Pipeline Campaign, EACOP, Zaki Mamdoo. He'll be giving us insight on Uganda, and we've seen in recent times the mass arrests that have happened as hundreds gathered worldwide, urging China to halt EACOP. And later on, we'll be exploring whether a significant number of Muslims in the UK are still voting Labour Party despite the party's support for apartheid Israel. This hour of News and Views is proudly sponsored by African Muslims Agency, a beacon of hope to communities for over 35 years in Africa and beyond. In a bit, we'll be joined by Zaki Mamdoo, the coordinator of the Stop EACOP campaign, and we'll be discussing the recent mass arrests in Uganda and the global protests urging China to halt financial support for the East African crude oil pipeline. Joining us via StreamYard is Zaki Mamdoo. Zaki, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Salam Media.
Morning, Salalo. Morning to the viewers, and thank you for having me on the program.
Pleasure's all ours. I think first and foremost, if we can get a bit of background and the latest current events when it comes to EACOP. If you can give us an overview of what exactly is the East African Crude Oil Pipeline Project and what it entails, and most importantly, why it has sparked such widespread opposition.
So the East African Crude Oil Pipeline Project, or EACOP as we like to call it, if built, would be the world's longest heated crude oil pipeline, stretching a distance of 1,400.
We seem to have lost Zaki in a bit, but I think once we get him back on air, he'll be giving us a bit more insight on what exactly EACOP is and what does it entail. But then I think if I can just give you a bit of background from my research here, is the fact that I'm still trying to get my bearings right, but yeah. As Zaki mentioned there in a bit, EACOP is going to be Africa's longest pipeline, and it's going to have a lot of environmental implications. But I don't have much knowledge. Zaki is back on StreamYard joining us. Zaki, I think we can bring him back on. Zaki, are you back on? Can you hear me?
I'm back on. Sorry about that.
No worries at all. Before we lost you there, we're still getting a bit of insight on what exactly is EACOP and what does it entail. But most importantly, why the widespread outrage the world over against it?
Sure. Yeah. So the East African Crude Oil Pipeline Project, if it's built, it would be the world's longest heated crude oil pipeline. It would be built to exploit Uganda's oil reserves, potentially oil reserves in the DRC and in South Sudan as well, and ship them straight or pump them through the pipeline straight to the coast of Tanga in Tanzania, where that crude oil would be sold off to serve the energy needs of countries abroad, as well as to line the pockets of a multinational and national elite. In its path, there are tens of thousands of people who stand to be impacted by and have already been impacted by the EACOP project. Upwards of 100,000 people have already lost their land as a result of it through the land acquisition process. And the result of that is that they are now reeling from the socioeconomic impacts, through having lost their land, which is their source of livelihood and income, and families are now grappling with increased food insecurity. They are unable to send their children to school and all of these things. And so a big part of the resistance to EACOP is because, look, ultimately it is a climate bomb, which stands through its lifetime to produce 375 million metric tons of carbon and push the entire globe ever closer, or ever deeper into the situation of climate collapse that we are already in. But alongside that, it is these socioeconomic impacts that the communities are already reeling from for a project which really does nothing to meaningfully benefit and uplift the material conditions of communities on the ground, of local people within the project's host countries. And ultimately, it's just a continuation of the same extractive neo-colonial agenda of taking a unrefined resource from the African continent and using it to make very few people rich, while the entirety of the social and economic cost and the environmental cost falls squarely on the shoulders of ordinary people.
And just to focus on the Ugandan government, how have they responded to the growing opposition of EACOP, and also what risks do activists face in this context? We've heard about, more than 30 people that have been arrested. Is it a really difficult place to try and voice out, your dissatisfaction to protest, as, here in South Africa would be used that, it's a democratic right. You can go out in the streets. What's the situation like in Uganda?
Yeah, I suppose, look, that repression, it's incredibly repressive political context that activists and community members in Uganda find themselves in. And part of that is why it is absolutely so important that people elsewhere across the African continent and across the globe, are coming out, taking to the streets, targeting major decision makers who are backing or who are behind the project, and bringing the voices of communities to the fore. For example, in our protest yesterday, which was part of a global day of action, it was the South African protest, which complemented protests taking place in 10 other countries across the globe, in Nigeria, in Uganda and Tanzania as well, in the DRC, in the UK, in France, in the Netherlands, etc. What we attempted to do yesterday, and of course we were met with arrogance and silence from the officials at the Chinese embassy, but we attempted to hand over, petitions signed by thousands of community members in Uganda, letters written by civil society organizations in Uganda and Tanzania, to make sure that these decision makers hear the voices of people impacted directly by this project. And of course, there have been numerous attempts within Ugandan society, from Ugandan civil society, as well as from communities, to do the same, right? And to take to the streets, in order to make their voices heard, but also to have more diplomatic and polite ways of engaging, requesting meetings, consultation, and all of these things. But they are met with, extreme forms of repression and violence when they do that. Just yesterday, comrades did take to the streets and attempted to march to the Chinese embassy to demand a meeting with the ambassador. Of course, China is, through its state-owned institutions and corporations, is a major player in the development of the EACOP project, as well as the associated oil drilling projects. And almost as soon as they arrive at the embassy, before they even have an opportunity, as we would in South Africa, to picket and sing and dance outside and give addresses and speeches and all of these things, they were immediately rounded up. 30 of them were put in the squad cars and taken to the police station. Look, fortunately, they've all been released now. But this is situated in a broader context of repression of land, human rights, and environmental defenders in Uganda. I mean, over the last 4 years, we've recorded 54 arrests, excluding the 30 from yesterday, but 54 arrests of defenders and activists who are voicing their concerns around EACOP. But there are also other forms of intimidation and violence. Just 3 weeks ago, there's a community member from the Kingfisher region in Uganda who was abducted by soldiers from the Ugandan military, the UPDF, and was held for 6 days, in really appalling and terrible conditions, simply because he has been a vocal advocate for the rights of his community in Kingfisher, who are experiencing violence at the hands of the military units that has been deployed to protect the oil developments in the Kingfisher region. So, taking all of this together alongside the... Yes, sorry.
So sorry to intervene there, but I just because we're running out of time a bit. I want to play devil's advocate a bit, right? Africa is a natural resource rich continent, and there's a lot of poverty in the continent, and these resources seen to be as a way to, kind of grow the continent's economy. We've seen it in other parts of the world, like in Saudi Arabia, where their oil is working for the population of the country, and they've went from a third world country to being one of the leading economies. What exactly are you guys calling for? Are you calling for the complete scrapping of the crude oil pipeline project, or are you calling for a more humane, more environmentally friendly way of going about it? Because ultimately, we need natural resources and the exploitation thereof to grow the continent's economy, to employ people, and rid of poverty. Well, how do we strike the balance between the two, and what exactly are you calling for?
So, look, it's a good question, and I wish we had more time so I could get into the intricacies of it. So I'm going to try and cover it as quickly as possible. But ultimately, look, if you look at this project, you look at the ownership structure of the project, there is absolutely nothing in it that would benefit ordinary people. It is, and you just see it in the name itself, it is the East African crude oil pipeline. So the intention is to take a unrefined, unmanufactured product and ship it. And if you look at the route of the pipeline, it goes straight to the coast of Tanga, to the oil terminal where it will be taken overseas. So they are taking a crude, unrefined product, shipping it overseas. And then at some point, Africans will be made to buy that back. Of course, if the intention behind, if Uganda had said, look, we have oil reserves and we want to use them to develop, we're going to build a refinery, and we're going to use this within moderation and make sure it doesn't impact our people, but use it to develop our economy and to provide for the energy needs of Uganda, as well as perhaps other countries in East Africa, we'd be having a very different conversation. But the reality of this project is that it is extractive, it is exploitative, it doesn't stand to create meaningful and lasting jobs and employment opportunities for people. The ownership structure is such that it will not bring a huge amount of income into Uganda's GDP or Tanzania's GDP. And even what it does bring, I mean, here you have an authoritarian regime which stands to and is looking to line its own pockets through the exploitation of this oil, not looking to develop society as a whole. It is a project which intends to give Total Energies, who is the major player behind it, and the major developer. It's standing to give them a 10-year tax holiday, and so there's nothing in here that would benefit ordinary people. And what communities are saying is, well, look, what we want and what we need in order to provide, the energy access that people across the African continent so desperately need is decentralized and socially owned renewable energy systems. And that key word there is, it must be socially owned. We need to find a way to break down this ownership model within our economy, which just leads and re-entrenches monopoly capitalism, the enrichment of a few at the expense of the rest, and find a way to make sure that the wealth of our natural world, the wealth of our resources, etc., is really used to benefit our people, and of course, it's done in a way which is sustainable, which is which is lasting, and in that as well, it is just to note, like, look, the climate crisis is not something that is far off. It is something that we are very much in, and so we do need to look beyond fossil fuels as well for development of the continent.
And just lastly, before I let you go there, where to from here? What steps does the Stop EACOP campaign plan to take in order to sustain pressure on financial institutions and all of the world's governments that are involved in this project?
Look, we'll continue to escalate our struggle against EACOP. I mean, it's something that is being picked up globally, and really on the African continent especially, is gaining a lot of traction and momentum, and becoming a broad social movement for climate justice and for an end to the neo-colonial, extractive and exploitative agenda. And ultimately, what our movement will continue to do is to wage that struggle and to carry forward the demands of communities, the voices, the experiences of communities on the ground, and insist time and time again that decision makers hear us. And we hope that everyone listening, everyone who becomes aware of these issues, will join us and help us carry that fight forward.
All right. Thank you so much, Zaki, for sharing your insights and shedding light on this very, very important issue. It's clear that the fight against EACOP is a very, very critical one with significant implications for both local communities and the global environment. We appreciate your time and dedication, and I'm sure we'll be chatting to you as the story develops.
Thanks, Lila. Thank you for having me.
There you have it. There's Zaki Mamdoo giving us insight on the hashtag Stop EACOP campaign. They had demonstrations all across the world in Uganda yesterday. There were mass arrests as hundreds gathered, urging China to halt EACOP. We're going to take a quick break, and you should stay tuned for more in-depth conversations and discussions on news and views with myself, Salailo Makwidire. Remember, your voice matters in the ongoing conversations about our planet's future. Protests and mass action does yield results, as we've seen in Kenya. So yeah, I think it's going to be really, really, really interesting times ahead, particularly with this project and the balancing act between saving the environment and the planet and growing economies and employing people. So yeah, I think there are creative ways that we can go about it. Yeah, so we're going to take a quick break. We'll see you right after this.